I'd appreciate if you'd take a moment to give me your thoughts about the previous year on the Lutheran Cartographer, what you liked and what could be improved. If you could go to lutherancartographer.com/2020 survey, I'd appreciate it. Let's get into the show. The Lutheran Cartographer, Episode 53. Welcome to the Lutheran Cartographer, the podcast where we explore what it's like to be Lutheran in different places. I'm your host, Nicholas Weber. Today we are going to Albany, Oregon to talk to Pastor Alexander Lange of Holy Cross Lutheran. Pastor Lange, welcome to the show.
Great to be here. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Help orient our listeners geographically. We're in Oregon. Where exactly is Albany?
Well, Albany is about a little over 20 miles south of Salem. Salem is the capital of Oregon. So if you are starting in Salem, you would go south on I-5, and after 20 or so miles, you would reach Albany, which is a smaller city, 52,000 people, roughly speaking.
All right, good deal. So then we're in Western Oregon, right?
Correct, yes.
Okay, and about, would you say like halfway, a little more than halfway down the state?
Yeah, just about there, yeah. You're in the general vicinity.
Okay, good deal. So let's talk a little bit about you. What's your background and how did you end up in Albany?
Well, I'm the firstborn son of a Lutheran pastor. So I was born in Pontiac, Illinois, and spent some time in the Midwest as my dad was in one or two parishes, was out there in the Illinois area. And then probably when I was second or third grade, we moved then to Oregon. And from there, I basically lived in Gresham, Oregon all my life, which is, if your listeners don't know, Gresham is east of Portland. It's basically a suburb east of Portland. And I lived there until basically I had graduated high school. And then from there, I went to college in Concordia University, Wisconsin, to get my bachelor's, then went to seminary in St. Louis, Concordia Seminary, St. Louis, and got my MDiv. And then graduating in 2015, I then got my call, and my first and only call has been to Holy Cross Lutheran Church in Albany. And so that's how I got to be in Albany. That's where I was placed right out of seminary. Fantastic.
You're quite familiar with Oregon. How would you contrast it with Wisconsin and Missouri?
You know, I remember when I traveled to Concordia, Wisconsin for the first time, flying. After leaving the airport, we were driving through Milwaukee, out of the city, and the first thing that really struck me was how many churches I could just see from the highway, how many steeples there were, and towers from these various cathedrals and Lutheran and Episcopal churches. You just, all these crosses sticking up in the air. And that really struck me. That was weird for me. It was beautiful, but weird, because we have a joke that if you look at the Rocky Mountains, you'll see all that snow on the Rocky Mountains. That's actually not snow. That's all the church transfer papers that never made it across the mountains. It's an old joke, but a good one. This is, there's a lot of people here in Oregon who do not attend church. They may consider themselves to be spiritual, but not religious. They don't want to commit to a particular religion or a particular church body or organization. A lot of suspicion regarding institutions. And then there's plenty of people who would just be happy to say they have no religious beliefs at all. They're kind of agnostic or secular. So that's probably one of the biggest differences, is that there's still a sense of it's still a kind of a religious culture out in the Midwest. You still, it still feels like the church has some kind of presence out there, whereas here not so much. That's probably the one that stands out in my mind, at least.
I see. Yeah, that's definitely a big difference. Are there any other things that our listeners should know in terms of drawing out how would you compare with where you've been with where you are now?
Well, I would say that one of the things that's really great about Oregon is the nature and the weather. Thinking back to the Midwest, there's plenty of places out in the Midwest where it's very flat, where you look out and no matter which direction you're looking, it all looks pretty much the same. Also, sometimes you get very extreme weather, very cold, snowy winters, very hot and humid summers. Thinking of like in St. Louis, the summers there. Here in Oregon, it's especially where I'm at, it's wonderful. You get plenty of forests, plenty of mountains. You have the beach really close by. It takes an hour. Just drive through the mountains, drive west, and you'll reach the beach, reach the oceans. There's plenty of rivers, and then also the weather is pretty mild. I mean, we don't have at least where I'm at, we don't have very extreme winters. We don't have extreme summers. It's pretty mild weather-wise, and so if you love to go outside, this is kind of a great place to be. There's a lot to do outside, a lot of camping, hiking, fishing, that sort of stuff.
Absolutely, yeah. That's one of the things I love about Washington, too. You've already started to talk about this. Let's talk a little bit more about what are some of the best things about Albany.
Yeah, that's definitely one of the things. Is if you are a nature lover, you're going to love Albany. It's very easy where we're at to find nature trails and places where you can hike. And if you go east, you reach the Three Sister Mountain Range. If you go west, you can go to the beach. So that's definitely one of the things. Personally, for me, I grew up kind of in suburbia. I have experience in big cities and I have experience in kind of farmland too, but I really was raised in suburbia. And so one of the things that's nice from my perspective is that Albany is not too big of a city. It doesn't feel like a big city. It's not like Chicago or San Francisco or St. Louis. So you don't have the dense population and all the skyscrapers and everything. But also there's still plenty to do. There's still plenty of businesses and places to go. There's enough people that I'm kind of a people person, enough people that I can spend time with and things to do, but also not too many. It's easy to find something to do, and it's also easy to get away from people if you want to too. There's that nice balance, I think.
That makes sense. So you'd say it's kind of, if you feel like being among people, that's an easy thing to do, but if you need a little space, it's not like there are people all around you all the time. Is that a good summary?
Exactly. Yeah, that's a very good summary. Yeah.
Okay, that makes sense. Let's go on and talk about some of the challenges about being there. We've already mentioned the secular atmosphere. What else would you say are some of the challenges about being there?
Well, I suppose that, and you probably would feel this way no matter which political party you affiliate with. Politics can be a bit of frustrating out here. So I suppose, being more conservative myself, I suppose if you're like a Republican or more conservative in nature, it can be pretty frustrating because in many ways it feels like the state is kind of entirely governed by one or two particular cities. And really, it feels like the Democrats have all the control on a state level, and that can be really frustrating if you're of a more conservative nature. And I don't know. I guess I'd have to ask, but I would also think though that if you're living in Albany and if you lean more left, I would think that could be frustrating too, because on a local level, we're much more conservative than say the state as a whole, the state or Portland. In fact, if you go out into places like Albany, or if you go out to Lebanon or any of these other towns surrounding us, you're going to bump into a lot of conservatives, a lot of Republicans. And so, I imagine that if you lean left and you're living in Albany, that could also be frustrating too, because, in Portland, you'd be among people who think the way you do, whereas if you were in Albany, you'd be kind of the minority. So I suppose that could be kind of challenging or frustrating. I think the weather is pretty mild here, but I suppose some people would complain that it's too wet. It is very wet here. There's plenty of rain. You have to kind of get used to the rain here. And it's the kind of rain, it often is the misty kind of rain where an umbrella wouldn't do you any good. You're going to get wet either way. So you don't see very many people carrying umbrellas. So that can be pretty frustrating. And then I would say just for our particular area that I often, if I hear my people complain about anything, more often than not, it has to do with the roads. I think Albany has grown quite a bit in recent years. And I think that our roads our road system is having a hard time keeping up. There are times when people are leaving work and certain roads get packed. And I-5 has been a mess for a long time. Nobody likes traveling the freeway up and down I-5. There's often road work, and they need to really put in another lane or two. It's can be pretty awful trying to get to your destination on I-5. So, we have our challenges, but overall, I really love Albany as a city. It's a really wonderful place to be, I think.
It sounds really good. You already alluded to it. I think one of the problems that we sometimes have when we think about other places is that we kind of project the news that we hear of one part of the state onto the rest of the state. So, for example, if somebody hears about Chicago, they imagine all of Illinois is like that, whereas if you go to Collinsville, Illinois, it's not Chicago at all. In the same way, people have been hearing a lot in the news lately about Portland, and you've already mentioned that Albany is different than Portland. How different is it, and how much of what happens in Portland actually affects the day-to-day in Albany?
Well, to kind of give you one just kind of an example of this. So our governor hasn't been as bad as, say, the governor of California, but she has been very quick to shut down the state or to put restrictions on us for COVID. And most recently for Thanksgiving, she basically said, cancel all your Thanksgiving plans. I don't want any of you celebrating with your family and friends. And she even said that if your neighbors are breaking my executive orders, you should tattle on them. Let the police know. Now, if you're somebody in Portland, you may appreciate her policies. Certainly not all people in Portland are like that, but I'm sure there are a lot of people who would appreciate and agree with her policies who live in Portland or near Portland. But Albany is a part of Linn County, and I was very pleased when the sheriff of Linn County basically joined a group of people, state representatives and so forth, who crafted this letter to the governor, basically saying, we are appealing to you to be more reasonable, to respect people's rights. And then the Linn County sheriff basically came out and said, you can make all these executive orders if you want, but I'm not going to arrest somebody for going and having Thanksgiving dinner with their family. I'm not going to do that. And so that kind of gives you an idea there of just how different Portland and Albany can be. When the riots were happening, I mean, we had a couple of protests outside of the Albany Police Department, but it was very quiet and peaceful. Certainly nothing at the level of what was happening in Portland. It was, when you consider the 52,000 people in Albany, it was very small protest. And it was nothing like what you would see in Portland. And so it is quite different here. Like I said, more conservative in nature, and certainly different. Certainly not what you see on the news. So
yeah, that makes sense. Let's take a moment for a word from our sponsor. Thank you so much for a great 2020 and for listening to the Lutheran Cartographer. It's been a great year. I've learned a lot of things about podcasting, and I'm sure you have some feedback for me as well, good and bad. I would appreciate it if you take a few moments of your time to go to lutherancartographer.com/2020 survey to let me know what you liked and what you didn't. And be sure and vote for your favorite episode as well. Thank you. Again, that's lutherancartographer.com/2020 survey. Thank you again. All right, let's go on and talk a little bit more about what it's like to be Lutheran there. We've already talked about the secularized atmosphere and how when you got to Wisconsin, you were amazed by the number of steeples. What's it like being Lutheran in such a place?
Well, in some ways, you're kind of unknown. You're the unknown person. In other words, people, they tend to not know much about Lutherans, or if they know about Lutheranism, they think of ELCA, right?
Yeah.
In fact, I was listening to your interview with Dan Freeman, and he made that point too, and I would agree, echo that same point. Yes, most people, they hear Lutheran, they think ELCA. But it's actually kind of an exciting time to be Lutheran. I've been finding, at least in Albany, because I think that we have in the West Coast been dealing with kind of this post-Christianity for some time. We've been dealing with secularism, this increasing secularism for some time, and a lot of people have kind of grown up with now in homes that are not religious, and they kind of are familiar with that. And then you have also, you do have churches in Albany and around here, but they're all, even though they are part of different denominations and may have differences, they are all kind of the same flavor. They're kind of generic American Christianity, a generic evangelicalism. The worship all sounds the same and looks the same. They all kind of talk the same. And what I've noticed lately is that there's a lot of people who don't know about Lutheranism, but when they find out about it, when they meet me or somebody or a member of my congregation and they learn about Lutheranism, they are actually really interested. They're curious because we're kind of very strange, you're not, you're religious, but you're not like these other churches. You're different. You're very different. And it's actually interesting because I've just been blown away these last few years. We've had some young people lately who have been just, they have some connection to a member in the church, and they learn through them about Lutheranism. They come and to sit and experience Lutheranism, and they're very curious about it. And lately we've had quite a few of them actually joining the church, and they were saying, they were just drawn to it because of how different we are, how different Lutheranism is. It's not the secularism that is permeating the culture, and it's not the stereotypical evangelicalism that they see in all the other churches. It's different. And so it's actually kind of exciting because of how different we are and how unknown we are. We can, I think it provides opportunities, I think.
Absolutely. Yeah, that makes sense. So the idea of kind of the atheism doesn't have the same romantic appeal anymore because people experience that in their day-to-day so much. And there's also the American Christianity that people are maybe tired of, and then Lutheranism brings something fresh and new. And as you say, it sounds different, right?
I think there's a lot of people who have they've seen what the secular culture has to offer, and they've seen what evangelicalism has to offer, and they're not interested in either. And when that happens, suddenly they're very interested in when there's a third option presented to them.
That makes sense. Let's go on and talk about what it's like to raise a family there.
I have a pretty young family. My wife and I currently have 2 daughters. So we have a 5-year-old girl and we have a 2-year-old girl. And we just a year ago bought our first home, and we're starting to kind of experience what it's like to raise a family here for the first time. I will say one of the things we've really appreciated about Albany is that there are tons of parks and playgrounds in the city. The city of Albany does a really good job actually of putting parks and playgrounds around the city and maintaining them. And so that's kind of a delight. We've got plenty of places to take our kids to play outside. I don't know if I have much to say about the schools, just because we just now have reached the point where my firstborn, she's really getting into school now, and we decided that we were going to, instead of go to the public schools, we're taking her at this time to Lutheran school in Corvallis. So one of the Lutheran churches in Corvallis, a city that's west of us, this church also offers a school, and so currently my daughter is going to their school. So we're supporting another local Lutheran church in their ministry, and they're helping us out. So that's wonderful. From what I've heard, I haven't heard. Talking to the other parents, they've seemed to be okay with the schools that are in the area. They seem like they're fairly decent schools. But that being said, though, I look at what's going on in our culture, and I'm concerned. So even though I've heard good things about our schools, I'm glad that we have a Christian school, a Christian private school we can go to too. I'm glad there's other options. So
Yeah, absolutely. Now let's talk about if you were to have a friend come into town and they're like, "Hey, what should I go see or do?" What are some of the good places to eat, things to do? What would you recommend if somebody's passing through Albany?
Well, one thing I'd probably do is take them to our downtown. We've got a downtown area with plenty of little shops and restaurants. And what's actually kind of neat is just recently they finished building this carousel. And the carousel has in many ways become kind of the pride of our city. It's a really neat carousel. They've got a gift shop, and they've got this little area where you can buy snacks and drinks, and they have a room so they can host birthday parties there if you want to. All of the animals that you ride on are handcrafted by volunteers, and they're still in the process of building it. It's kind of their plan is they're just going to keep, as long as they keep having volunteers and donations, their plan is to just keep crafting more and more of these animals, so that way they can kind of cycle through them. So that way when the Christmas season comes, you have very Christmas related animals, but then when it's maybe springtime, you bring in the spring animals. And then they have also just introduced a museum where if you go downstairs to their basement, they have basically where they show you kind of their workshops, and they kind of show you what they're working on and their plans for the future. And I guess there used to be a carousel here in the past that this carousel is replaced, that they tore down, and so they have some of the old carousel features that they kind of show you. So that's pretty neat. Like the kids really especially love that. Love going to the carousel. We've got plenty of wineries in the area. So especially if you drive up I-5 and head north, there's a lot of wineries. That part of Oregon, the far western and northern part of Oregon, we're especially well known for our Pinot Noir. They make some really good wine, and so there's a lot of wineries you could visit and do wine tasting. Also, it's Oregon, so there's plenty of small breweries around that you could also visit. In fact, downtown we have Calipoia Brewery, and they have a great selection of beers and some of the best homemade potato chips and French fries that I've ever had. They really have really excellent food and great beer to go with it. So if you like, beer, and if you like wine, there's probably going to be some place for you. And then, depending on what time of year it is, there's usually something going on. So, for example, during the late spring, they usually have a Northwest Art and Air Festival where you get to look at artwork and purchase it, and people can set up booths. And then people, they bring their hot air balloons, and so you got all these hot air balloons that are all over in the sky that you get to, see. And even if you can't make it to the festival itself, if you're in town shopping or something, look up. You'll probably see a few hot air balloons above your head, which is kind of neat. And also during Christmas time, we have the town usually puts together this little this thing where you can come, and basically they have these different booths where volunteers they build these sceneries, like where they'll have, for example, Hansel and Gretel, or the three little bear, the three bears, or the three little pigs, where they have, with stuffed animals and stuff, they like build these scenes for the kids to enjoy, and they have like train sets that are, these electrical train sets you can look at, and then as you're taking your kids through all of these scenes, at the very end, of course, is Santa Claus, and you can go have your kids take their picture with Santa Claus, and they collect food for the local food pantry there too, and usually there's a few vendors there selling their hot chocolate and their donuts and so forth. And so, depending on what time you come, there's usually something going around town that if you're wanting to get out and about and do something, there you can usually find something to do in Albany. So
Pastor Lange, as we start to close out the podcast, I want to make sure to give you the opportunity to point our listeners where you'd like. Your church's website, places to follow you online. Where would you like to send our listeners?
Well, we do have a website. It's if you go on our website, it is holycrosslutheranalbany.org. I'll say that again because it is kind of long. It's holycrosslutheranalbany.org, and and there's no capital letters or anything there. So that would be our website, and you can go there if you want to learn a little bit more about us. We also have advertisements on issues, etc., that can also kind of point you in the right direction. And we also have a presence on Facebook. If you can find us on Facebook. We do have a Facebook page that we try to update once in a while, with announcements about our various services and so forth. And so that would be another place if the listeners have any desire to learn more about us, they could check us out there if they have a Facebook presence. So.
Great. And listeners, you can find all those links at lutherancartographer.com/53, which will be the show notes page for this show. Pastor Lange, thank you so much for your time today. What are your parting thoughts for our listeners?
I would just say that if you're, in the area, feel free to drop on by to Holy Cross on Sunday morning and join us for the divine service. We'd love to have you. And if you let me know that you're a visitor, I'm more than happy to point you into a direction for something good to eat or fun to do. Albany is a very nice little city, and it's worth visiting. So I hope to see you there.
Fantastic. Thank you again. God's peace.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Lutheran Cartographer. For more about the things that we talked about today, check out the show notes page at lutherancartographer.com/53. Thank you so much for listening to the Lutheran Cartographer in the past year. I'd appreciate it if you take a few moments of your time to answer a few quick survey questions. That's at lutherancartographer.com/2020 survey. Be sure and let me know what your favorite episodes were too. If you take a few moments to make sure that you don't miss an episode, you can do that by subscribing on Stitcher or on iTunes. And while you're there, I'd appreciate it if you'd leave a rating and a review. That way more people will listen to the podcast. Until next time, I'm Nicholas Weber. Thanks for listening. I'll talk to you soon.